and thank you for joining us today for City in the Making. My name is Greg Clough, and I will be hosting a discussion today related to the proposed widening of I-70 east of I-25 here in Denver. There's been a lot of publicity around the proposal recently, as the Denver Post, as well as a number of other media sources, have featured stories about the proposal. In addition, we are currently in the public review and comment period for the I-70 East proposal, which runs from August 29th until October 31st. We are interested in looking more closely today at the proposal and better understanding what exactly is being proposed, and also learn more about a community group called Unite North Metro Denver, who would like further consideration of a separate proposal that would reroute I-70 north of Denver and convert the I-70 portion that runs through Denver into a boulevard. I am joined today by two representatives of Unite North Metro Denver, Steve Kinney and Dean Foreman, who will give us some background on the proposal from CDOT, as well as a better understanding of UNMD's preferred alternative. Welcome, Steve and Dean, and thank you for being here today. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourselves? What's your background? What is Unite North Metro Denver? And how did you get involved with this group?
I'm an architect. I've been practicing in Denver for over 30 years. I got involved in this group about 3.5 years ago when doing advocacy for station area planning and transit-oriented developments through my work with the American Institute of Architects Urban Design Committee, which I chaired for 3 years. We were going into the neighborhoods to advocate for transit-oriented developments. We found out about the highway. We started doing research, and we started getting actively involved in what was happening.
I'm Steve Kinney, and I'm a residential realtor now for about 13 years. Probably about half of my business, so in total, somewhat more than 100 houses, have been in neighborhoods that are I-70 adjacent. And I learned about it through a friend from the Highland Mommies group who sent me a posting saying that there was a town hall meeting, and that was in April 2013. And I went and participated in that meeting. It was the first I had heard of it. And I was struck by something that seemed incredibly logical, which is an opportunity to move the interstate out of 12 central Denver neighborhoods where the interstate was actually never intended to be. And it made perfect sense. And I became involved by way of that channel and met some very talented, thoughtful people, and have been actively engaged since then because I think that it's something that is incredibly important to the vibrancy of Denver, Denver's neighborhoods, and so many other factors, including health and connectivity and transportation.
Well, thank you both for that, and thank you both for being here today. I would like to take this opportunity to mention that we attempted to have representatives supporting the CDOT proposal on today's show. Unfortunately, due to a number of factors, they were not able to make it today, but we do hope to have them on a future program in the near future. For those who are not familiar with the proposal, let's take a bit of time and discuss what exactly is being proposed by CDOT. From my understanding, the proposal entails a widening of I-70 to 5 lanes in both directions, starting at Tower Road and extending west until Brighton Boulevard. Included in the proposal would be two toll lanes in each direction. In addition, there would be a below-grade trench built between Brighton and Colorado Boulevards that would drop I-70 underground, and a park would be placed on top, allowing the historic neighborhoods of Elyria, Swansea, and Globeville to be reunited. According to CDOT, this expansion is necessary due to a number of factors, which include the growth of the metro area, increased traffic that's foreseen in the future, as well as the fact that the elevated portion of I-70 is nearing the end of its lifespan and it needs to be replaced. That is the proposal in a nutshell, as I understand it, but I would appreciate if Dean and Steve, if you have anything to add to that basic description of the proposal.
So the proposal as CDOT has outlined it, which is on the screen here, is referred to as the partially covered lowered alternative, and all the information that you just noted is indeed correct. I think that a few additional details that are really important to understand is that this freeway section from Brighton Boulevard to nearly Hawley will be in a trench that in some places will be 40 feet below grade. and that is in total approximately 8,200 feet long. And indeed, the current plans note that there would be what they refer to as a lid on top that would be adjacent to Denver Public Schools' Swansea Elementary School. That lid, unlike a common perception, is actually going to be 2.5 blocks long. The maximum length that they're allowed to make it is either 800 or 900 feet.
Without doing artificial...
Without doing ventilation and a bunch of additional drainage.
I think it's important to point out that that a lot of the attention that's been given to this project is centered around these neighborhoods, rightfully so, because they're actually tearing out houses and businesses to do this. The entire project goes from Brighton Boulevard all the way to Tower Road. That's 12.5 miles.
It is.
It's the biggest project in CDOT's history, including the Glen Canyon project. It's the biggest thing they've ever done. By widening this to 10 lanes for that distance, what they're doing actually is adding 2 managed lanes. You mentioned it, toll lanes, to the entire length. So they're planning on widening it by over 3 times its current width. And 40% of that is going simply for the benefit of wealthy people to get through this area more conveniently. The 3 lanes that are left are no more than there are there now. So they are not actually widening this for the benefit of the locals that use it or for the city in general, but simply to provide a way to get through this area more conveniently.
So in total, it will be 3.2 times wider in the middle of the Elyria and Swansea neighborhoods of Northeast Denver. And many people would say, well, why is it that if it is currently 6 lanes and it's going to be 10, is it 3.2 times wider? And the answer to that question is that in addition to the 6 lanes that are currently there, as we've just discussed, there are going to be 4 toll lanes, 2 in each direction. And then there will be 2 lanes at grade, not down in the trench, that will be on the north side. There'll be feeder roads or service road lanes that will be providing access for those in and out of the community, both many businesses. There's a lot of industrial business in there, including Purina dog food and one other dog food factory. And then there'll also be 2 lanes on the other side of the freeway. Plus, then to bring it up to current standards, they need to make on-off ramps much longer. In this particular case, they're actually taking several exits out. The York Josephine exit is deleted. A portion of the Steele Vasquez exit will be deleted. Maybe all of it will be deleted. There's some discussion of that. And then you have crash barriers and you have breakdown lanes and a variety of other things.
Do you have that slide that you can show?
So this is the way that it's going to look from an aerial image. This is CDOT's rendering from their supplemental draft EIS that was released about 3 months ago and for which we are currently in the public comment period.
You brought up a couple good points, and one was that they are bringing it up to standards. Currently, a couple of those off-ramps are dangerous, and there's no question that they are. But by bringing the highway up to current standards, what they're doing is they're reducing the number of access points on and off the highway. And that is why highways don't work in cities, because cities are based around human scale, around your ability to walk from one street to another, to bicycle, to get around conveniently. What CDOT is doing here and what highway departments do by pulling highways, which are designed to provide traffic in high speed between cities into the city, is it reduces that access. It cuts down the ability of people to get it on and off, and it widens it to the extent that it does here because of the nature of those standards. So they are removing over 50 homes and over 17 businesses in an area that was never intended to have this highway in the first place. In 1960, this area was 46th Avenue was their boulevard. This was how they got east and west. And in fact, 46th Avenue exists under those viaducts right now as a viable street. This will remove all of that, pull it to the side, and pull on and off-ramp traffic into the neighborhoods.
So on the screen now, we have a picture of what the elevated freeway currently looks like. And so underneath this freeway, much to many people's surprise, is a 4-lane boulevard. It is 46th Avenue, much as it existed in 1960, although they had to cut down all the trees to put the freeway above. And the next slide, which I'm about to change to, is something that we are proposing. It's something that we're asking CDOT to evaluate. It is something, despite very common misperceptions, partially because of the messaging that CDOT has been doing, has not been studied.
So understanding some of your concerns, I think it would be valuable to get a better perspective of what is the alternative proposal favored by Unite North Metro Denver that would reroute I-70. So I would love to hear from you guys, if you could explain a little bit more to us in the audience exactly what that entails.
So what we're advocating for is for CDOT to do a supplemental draft EIS on the I-270 and I-76 reroute. And that is not something that they have looked at. And so that would ultimately mean that the non-local traffic, as an example, a trucker that would be driving from Kansas to Utah, or a commuter that would be driving from Golden to Aurora, would instead drive on I-70 as we know it today as I-270 and I-76. So those commuters would be driving an additional roughly 1.8 miles to get to their destination, again going from Golden to Aurora or Kansas to Utah. And we think that they would be getting to their destination more quickly using less fuel, and for truckers this is very important, less wear and tear on their vehicle if they're running that route, especially if they're running it during the daytime when traffic levels are heavier. Because it doesn't matter how you look at it, this 10 lanes plus 2 more for a total of 14 is absolutely going to bottleneck when it constricts into 6 lanes when it hits approximately I-25. So if they drive the additional 1.8 miles around, then they're going to get to their destination much more rapidly. Then, in our proposal, we would be having the current path of I-70, which would be from roughly Stapleton's Central Park Boulevard to roughly between Harlan and Wadsworth, converted to a 6-lane boulevard. So that's the same total number of lanes that would be in a boulevard in the future as compared to what is currently there. We're anticipating that, and this is based upon some traffic modeling that has been done both by CDOT in a response to a letter that Dennis Gallagher sent to them, and also by some local graduate school students. We anticipate that about 40% of the traffic that's currently on I-70 would stay on that existing path, which we would then know as 48th Avenue Boulevard in Northwest Denver and 46th Avenue Boulevard in Northeast Denver.
So I think we just saw on the screen 2 different versions of that rerouting. The initial one was what was put in the CDOT proposal, and then we also saw Unite North Metro Denver's proposed realignment.
Yeah, there's some misconceptions here. CDOT continues to say that they've studied this reroute alternative. What they've studied is a partial reroute, where a portion of 270 would be widened, but staying in Denver County, the road would veer off to the west before it got out of the county and circle back and come down approximately on top of where the National Western is. This was a viable alternative before the National Western decided to stay, but now it won't work for a number of reasons. Another one was because they own none of this right away.
And this alternative, which is on this screen right now, the reroute that they studied in the draft EIS that was delivered back in 2008, their first attempt at this, that was eliminated because it was deemed to have too great of an impact on the Elyria, Swansea, and Globeville neighborhoods. We very much agree that that reroute absolutely should have been eliminated. It didn't make any sense. The net benefit was, well, there was no net benefit.
Right.
And so I'm going to switch slides here to one which I think was just on, which is the reroute that we're proposing. This is a reroute that CDOT has not studied. This is a reroute that people who have been active in this discussion now for 4 and 5 years have been asking for a minimum of 3 and 4 years to have this reroute studied. We know that CDOT and elected officials have received in the range of 1,000 emails specifically requesting that this be done, and it has fallen on deaf ears to a large degree. We hear a response from some city council members and from CDOT saying, we've already studied the reroute. The problem is, though, the reroute that they've studied is not the one that we're asking them to study.
So you should bring up this other slide too, because I think this provides a little more perspective. This is only a small portion of this project. What we're suggesting is that just the portion from I-270 to I-25 be turned into a boulevard. It has potential to turn the western portion of that into a boulevard as well, which I think would definitely obviously affect the people of northwest Denver. But widening the highway through that section is likely to reach them soon, even though they're promising not to happen as well. In fact, the I-70 was never supposed to go through this area. It was originally planned through this reroute. It was only brought through 46th Avenue as political payback during an election. So what we're suggesting is really to put it back where it was supposed to be and give these neighbors back the street that was always theirs.
So we're again asking that CDOT study this alternative, this I-270 and I-76 reroute. It appears to those people who have looked at the numbers carefully, and that includes engineers, that includes urban planners, that includes people in the political science realm, a whole lot of people. In fact, a lot of people who have been involved in very big infrastructure projects in Denver over the last 20, 30, 40 years have looked at this, and they think that there's a pretty good likelihood that to do the full I-270 and I-76 reroute, we would solve the traffic congestion issues on I-70 on both sides of I-25, and we would do it for half the amount of money. A couple of the reasons why we anticipate it would be for half the amount of money is that CDOT already owns roughly a 300-foot right-of-way along the entire I-270 and I-76 corridors. Probably, and this is my speculation, probably because that's where the freeway was always intended to go. CDOT owns a very, very narrow right-of-way, especially in northeast Denver, and that's why the impact to the community is going to be so great. We also think that there are going to be some opportunities here or some lower liability with the reroute because the northeast Denver area where the trench will be built, that again is 8,200 feet long, the majority of that is in the area that's part of the plume from the Asarco smelter. It was a copper smelter, Superfund cleanup site. So in the mid-90s, the EPA came in and did a tremendous amount of cleanup in Glowville, Elyria, Swansea, Curtis Park. It got into Whittier and Five Points. It may have even gotten as far as Cole and Clayton neighborhoods. And we know that there's significant amounts of contamination in there. And so that complicates it. Plus, it's really important to recognize that paving at surface, at grade, on the ground, costs a fraction of what it costs to dig a tunnel. An illustration would be, for purposes of building an apartment building, a below-grade parking garage space is generally going to cost about $30,000 per space to build, whereas a surface-level parking space costs about $2,000 per space to build. And that illustration is appropriate here.
Let me put this into perspective. The projected cost for the entire project from Brighton Boulevard all the way to Tower Road is $2.2 billion. The biggest project in CDOT's history. The cost for the trenched portion alone is over $1.1 billion. That's $61 million a lane mile. It's significantly more expensive than anything anywhere in the country. And why? Because what they're doing is they're digging into, as Steve said, waste sites. In fact, there are 62 identified waste sites that they've located in this trench. They're digging it up to 40 feet into the ground. That's into a water table. This is the lowest spot in Denver. They're disrupting every utility in the city. All of the drainage that had been going underground naturally will be cut and walled off. They have to now pump this out into detention ponds, which will be on the surface, and get it into the river. So that's why the heavy cost for all of this.
Now, I mean, obviously there's a lot of challenges related to this, as you guys have made clear. And the Boulevard sounds like a great alternative, but has this been successful in any other communities? Has anyone else tried this Boulevard idea?
In fact, it's being tried. It's being done all over the world. We have lists of over 20 cities right now that have actually done it or in current planning to do this. And I know it seems counterintuitive to believe that you could actually take down a highway. And I don't want to tell you that we're here saying all highways should come down. I drive highways every single day. Everybody does. They just simply shouldn't be in the cities. The idea that you could take a highway down in a city seems impossible. It seems like it's crazy talk. And that's what you get when you talk to CDOT, is they say this is crazy. But in fact, it has happened. And a perfect example is what's on the screen now, the Embarcadero Freeway. In 1989, the Loma Prieta earthquake in the San Francisco area collapsed two of their major highways. The Embarcadero was one of them. It was a double-decker highway, and that came down all at once, along with the Central Freeway, all at once. You would have thought that the next day there would have been a Carmageddon happening in San Francisco. Well, in fact, it didn't. And it was shocking to the city that this could be. And it's the same thing. How can you take down a highway without all those people having no place to go? Well, in fact, they do have places to go. And if you drive to work and the highway gets too crowded, you have another way to go. Everyone does. And what happened here is they recognized it. And what they did was they replaced that hideous monstrosity of a double-decker highway with the boulevard that's there now. The Embarcadero. It's one of the most beautiful streets in the world.
I think that there's an important case study to be learned from a number of these. The ones that Dean just mentioned. There's another in Seoul, South Korea, that was an amazing political success. This one obviously is not in the United States. There are many in the United States. The West Side Freeway in New York City. There was one in Milwaukee. The one in Milwaukee actually is a great case study. And if people wanted to know more information about it, they could go to Reimagine I-70 channel on YouTube and look for an interview done with John Norquist. And
John Norquist was the mayor of Milwaukee at the time. Okay. He and Peter Park, who was the head of the planning department here, together took down that highway in Milwaukee, and very successfully. And now he is advocating for highway removals around the world.
So there's some really valuable information there.
This highway in Seoul, or in South Korea, carried between 160,000 and 180,000 cars a day. They took it down. Look at what they did. They replaced it with two boulevards on either side and brought the river back. The river was essentially buried. It was a benefit that had been ignored for years. And now it's a centerpiece of the entire city. And in fact, the mayor who was instrumental in doing it is now president of the country.
So we have many, many examples, and it's relatively easy to find these. We see them all over the United States. We're now seeing them in other parts of the world. And it's interesting because what it does is it creates a sense of place for a lot of these communities. Currently on I-70, as an example, in Globeville or in Elyria or Swansea, there's a big divider between one half of the community and the other. Because literally I-70 went almost exactly through the middle of Globeville, Elyria, and Swansea. As of right now, there is some connectivity because you can cross underneath the freeway in many places. And we're very concerned that after they build the trench, that they will have further isolated the community. The intent of their lid, the cover that would be up to 2.5 blocks long, is that reconnects the community. But the reality is it's eliminating about 2/3 of the potential crossing points that exist today. And we think that maybe it's creating an attractive nuisance, meaning a place where kids could be hurt. And we're also a little bit concerned that because there will be so many 18-wheelers coming in and out of the industrial areas in those neighborhoods, that those roads in particular at grade will be far busier, especially with the loss of the exits in that community.
It's rather appalling to me that they're suggesting that they place a public space above a highway. Highways are the most polluted spots in the world. This one in particular, because it sits on such a wealth of polluted sites, is the most polluted spot in the state. And they're suggesting building a play space for children on top of it.
I think this brings up an interesting point, though, because even through the reroute, it would seem that some communities on the reroute might be affected. Commerce City, for example, might be negatively impacted. What is your response to that kind of argument?
My response would be that 270 and 76 exist right now, and they exist as interstate highways exist, with cloverleaf exchanges, with wide right-of-ways, with a width of buildings next to it that don't infringe on it. This neighborhood is different. It is right under the highway. They have to remove houses and businesses to do anything there. As you go up 270 and 76, look at it on a Google map. You can see quickly how there is nothing in that width. Plus, the nature of the on and off ramps in those areas is made for that kind of thing. And a lot of communities work fine with that. Cloverleaf exchanges, getting you on and off ramp, getting you into a business district or an industrial area that's suited to that kind of thing. In fact, a lot of this is industrial, and they are well suited to that. Commerce City and Arvada need actually more investment, and they're set for the kind of investment and planning, in fact, for the kind of investment that would occur around the kind of intersections that are created when an interstate goes through. These neighborhoods are not like that.
So I would take it a step further and just talk about statistics. So there is a small handful of homes that are within 1,000 feet of I-270 in Commerce City. And there are approximately 4,000 homes between Stapleton, Central Park Boulevard, and Harlan that are within 1,000 feet of I-70. And especially in the future, and I would say when, not if, it's widened in North Denver, that impact is going to be even greater. And so I'm not trying to remotely suggest that we minimize the concern about what would be potential increased pollution for a handful of houses in Commerce City. That's something we do need to pay attention to. But a handful versus 4,000 is significant.
I want to point out something else. We found that CDOT and other groups are already actually planning for the widening of 270 and tolling it. We found documents that show it in the early planning stages. So it's disingenuous for them to say that they aren't planning that. They may not be actively planning it, but they're already planning for the tolling and widening of 270. So this is already being planned. I think the key is that we have a very unique opportunity in this city. Not all highways can be taken down successfully. I think what we see around the country and around the world is that in some cases they can be. Because I-70 or 270 and I-76 are there, and because they have the right-of-way, and because those areas are more suited, more industrial to the expansion of that, we think the opportunity is ripe for this kind of solution. Because these neighborhoods don't deserve this. They didn't deserve it 60 years ago. They didn't have a voice 60 years ago when this thing was put through it. And they really still don't have a voice. It takes groups like ours, I think, to really stand up and come out on behalf of the citizens of those neighborhoods, many of whom are really kind of cowed by what's going on. They may know it, but a lot of them don't speak English. A lot of them avoid the public meetings. You don't see a whole lot of neighbors in those meetings.
I think that brings up an interesting point. In some of the media that I've read recently, there seems to be a feeling of this is going to happen regardless. There seems to be why fight? The decision's already been made. What is your response to those kind of arguments?
Well, I've got one right off the bat, because when I started my work on this over 3.5 years ago, the DEIS was just about to be published. And they were ready. They were done, and they were going to widen it in an elevated configuration. I don't know if you have that slide here. It might be hard to get back to.
I can get to it in a moment.
But it was the DEIS was complete at that time. They were going to publish it. It was going to be widened in an elevated way. It was that proposal that really got me and my group involved in this, because we couldn't believe it. We couldn't believe that they were seriously suggesting that they take that same highway and simply drag it through more of the area. So when we got involved, we got to study what happened in other cities around the world, and that's when we started finding out that these were being taken down elsewhere.
I don't have it.
Well, that's okay. But on that same line of thinking, I know that there are other proposals beyond just the rerouting. There are other people concerned that this might have a negative impact on the Globeville area Swansea, the neighborhoods that would be impacted. Is there any other alternatives that have been considered that you could see supporting, or that you think have valid considerations?
Do you have these slides of the lowered, the reduced width? I think one of the things that we need to point out here is the incredible width of this highway. 3 times its current width. And a lot of it is because of these managed lanes. So that one. Here on the slide you see the existing configuration in the upper right with the elevated portion and 46 down below it, and their proposal for the 2 managed lanes. Do you have another slide?
I do. It's right here.
So that's the existing one. What others in the city are asking, and Dennis Gallagher has come out in favor of stopping 10 lanes, because it's the managed lanes that add 40% to the width of this. If it's $1.1 billion to make it this wide through this trench, I think the question is being asked, to whose benefit is this being done? Why is 40% of $1.1 billion worthwhile to get people through it? So I think the question as another alternative has to be asked, what could be done with 1 managed lane? What could be done in its current footprint? How many fewer homes and businesses how many less homes could be removed if they stayed in their current footprint? And that's when we started really looking at the Boulevard as a decent alternative, because look at the drawing. It's there already. All you have to do is take that thing down and put it back.
And what other options exist, given that DRCOG and CDOT have clearly outlined that I-270 will be getting improvements and I-270 will be widened, regardless of what's happening in this corridor? I think we also have to talk about timing here, and that is that, to some degree, going back to your question of, a lot of people seem to think that this is already a done deal, and CDOT would very much like for everybody to think that this is a done deal. A lot of people think that the train has already left the station. We think that it has not. There's a lot that still needs to be done on this, and I think it's really, really important for people to make those public comments. Make those comments to CDOT. They're due by Friday, and we'll have that website available here.
I think you can see it on the screen right now.
It's especially important for people to talk about the things that they know and how it relates to their situation, and to ask questions.
That's the completion of my thought that I inadvertently didn't finish before. Sorry, was that 3 years ago, when I started pushing for the elevated not to be built, they politely asked me to leave their offices. Said thank you very much for being here, but we're done. We're done with this study. We have no more money. We have no more time. Thank you very much, but leave. That was 3 years ago. In those 3 years since, they've had second thoughts. They completely turned around themselves. They didn't go out into the public and ask if they should do another alternative. They simply couldn't get consensus. So they came up with the trench alternative. And I think one of the reasons that they did was because of their, do you have this slide? One of the reasons they did was because of what they see as the success of I-25. And I've lived here for 40 years. I've driven this highway for most of that. And it's an interesting case study. And the fact that they think that this is a model for what's happening now is interesting. Because really, if you look at this probably isn't that much different than what you'll be seeing if they do this trench. It will be actually wider, and it won't have the light rail station running along the side. But this is a very interesting slide, and I took it one morning when I got out of the car because I could. This is I-25 heading south into the Denver Tech Center. This is at DU. This is every single day. twice a day. And I drive the opposite way so I can see them both. But those are stoplights. This is a parking lot going all the way to the Denver Tech Center twice a day. So 10 years ago, CDOT determined, because traffic was so bad on this section of highway, that they wanted to spend millions and millions of dollars to widen it. And that's what they did. They widened this highway, and look at it now. 8 years later, it's just as crowded as it's ever been. And the point I want to make about this is that highways are built to a standard that allows cars to go faster, but going faster isn't necessarily good for traffic. In fact, traffic is most efficient at 35 miles an hour. They don't want you to believe it. They've designed it so you can go 90. But actually, if all that traffic went at 35 miles an hour, it would be the most efficient way to get cars back and forth. But they see that as a level F. And if this is their model for success, in 8 years it's already filled back up. How wide is wide enough? Do we keep going? Do we keep going from 4 here to 5 to 6? Where do we stop? Have you been in Houston? Have you been on the 405 in Los Angeles? It's now 12 lanes.
I think that this brings us to something that's a positive of our proposal, which is that, as Dean mentioned, the studies are very clearly showing that an artery can carry the greatest number of vehicles per hour when it's approximately 35 miles an hour. So we would have, along what is currently I-70, and that would be a boulevard, a 6-lane boulevard, same number of lanes, we would have essentially the same capacity. Now, it would be marked as 30 or 35 miles an hour, not 55, but especially during those rush hour times, it's going to carry traffic so much more effectively. And the most important part of this is that 60% of that traffic that's currently on that corridor is not going to be on that corridor. So those people, as an example, people in Stapleton trying to get downtown using that artery are going to get to their destination much more quickly. The trucker going from Kansas to Utah, who's bypassing that area, is going to get to his or her destination much more quickly. And we're going to be moving the emissions from those vehicles, especially those truck vehicles, out of the neighborhood. And that's critical right here because the studies are very, very clearly showing the health impacts of living very close to a freeway. They're significant. While we cannot attribute all of this to it, the residents who are living in Elyria, Swansea, and Globeville have nearly a 40% elevated level of children having respiratory illness, in particular asthma, than the rest of the city on average. The people in Elyria, Swansea, Globeville, on average, have a life expectancy of 3.5 years less than the city on average. If you multiply that out by the number of residents of Elyria, Swansea, Globeville, that's 50,000 years of life lost. And a significant portion of that is attributable to the freeway. So if we were to move this to a place where there are a handful of houses versus 4,000 houses within 1,000 feet of the freeway, and to a place where there is either 1 or 2 schools versus 12 schools that are within what EPA deems to be the impact zone. And if we essentially weave the urban fabric of these communities back together, where, as an example, if you're at 48th and Perry, and you're looking at what right now is a very ugly sound fence in a right-of-way that is not maintained, it's full of weed trees, it's full of trash, it's full of broken concrete, you would be able to wave to your neighbor to the other side. It adds to connectivity, it adds to walkability, it adds to bikeability, it encourages more use of the light rail.
It increases property values, which is some of the things. I don't know why you've missed this point, because this is what you're all about. Talk about that.
I think there's a lot of valid points you're making there, but this is obviously would have a positive impact on Northeast neighborhoods. Could you speak about what kind of impact the rerouting would happen on other neighborhoods beyond the Northeast? What you foresee?
I'll start with that, and then you can follow up. So, at the point at which the boulevard would be continued on the west side of I-25, it would have an immediate impact to the Sunnyside, the Chaffee Park neighborhoods, they would essentially become reconnected with each other, and with the Berkeley neighborhood and the Regis neighborhood, and it would drive property values up. I was among 16 realtors who did a very comprehensive study in 2013, and that survey showed that the anticipated increase in property value, if a boulevard was done, was going to be in the range of 30% for those properties that are within 2 blocks of the interstate in Elyria, Swansea, and Globeville. And it wasn't nearly as great in Northwest Denver, but it was still very, very significant. In fact, the respondents of this survey, these are realtors who work in central Denver and sell a lot of houses in central Denver, and are very well qualified to be having this discussion and making these predictions. They were suggesting that there would be a positive impact for up to 8 blocks off of the interstate highway. A portion of the study looked at what is the difference of the property values living on one side of the freeway versus the other. Specifically, we looked at the area between Lowell and Tennyson, and between 46th Avenue and 50th Avenue in the Berkeley neighborhood in Northwest Denver. And so that would be 2 blocks on either side of the freeway, both north and south. And the property values on the north side, which many would, I think very incorrectly, deem to be living on the wrong side of the freeway, because it's on the side away from the larger part of the community, that part of the community that has more retail and more of the amenities of the community. It was 19% lower in terms of property sales statistics in 2013 for the 12 months prior than it was on the south side. And yet, interestingly, the south side has more pollution and more noise, more sound pollution, because the prevailing winds typically take the pollution from northwest to southeast. And yet there was a 19% difference. So it suggests that the benefit of weaving the urban fabric of these neighborhoods back together, which was very much ripped apart in 1963-64 when the freeway was built, really needs to happen. And it needs to happen now, because this probably is our last opportunity. If CDOT or the state or whatever the power that be signs a long-term contract with a public-private partner, which is their intent for the toll lanes component of this project. Some people are speculating that that would be 50 or 60 years. Others are suggesting that after what occurred on the US 36 discussion last year, that it might be shorter, like 35 years. But if that contract is signed, and if $1.1 billion is spent to do a very short segment from Hawley to Brighton, I think our destiny is sealed for what could be in the future. And so, to some degree, it is now or never. We do have some opportunities beyond this public comment period to make this change. There are some important things that will still happen. This project is not currently funded. This project will have to be funded, and the discussion, as I understand it now, is that the state's Bridge Enterprise Fund will be paying for this. The Bridge Enterprise Fund is the money that goes to repair, build, and deal with bridges throughout the state. And there has been editorial coverage and there has been discussion from CDOT about that amount. Based upon current levels, this one project in Denver will consume 50% of the state's bridge budget for the next 3 decades. For one project in Denver, which means the people in Montrose, the people in Rifle, the people in Durango, the people in Roggen, the people in Strasburg, they're not going to get their bridges because we've got this one project in Denver. And that's important. There are a couple of other factors too, and that is that City Council, Denver City Council specifically, will need to vacate the right-of-way which Denver currently owns, which is 46th Avenue. Currently, the elevated section of I-70 sits above it, but Denver apparently still owns that property. And this project cannot proceed until City Council basically deeds that property to CDOT. And that's something that would be happening next year or the year after. And that's something that our City Council people, many of whom are going to be running for re-election, and some of whom will be new, because there are quite a few who were turned out. That's something we as individuals in the city and county of Denver need to be asking city council to say, hey, why is it that you're supporting this? Why is it that in, I believe it was April, you, with one exception, maybe two exception of the 13, voted to endorse the proclamation to proceed with CDOT's current plan, despite the fact that the plan wasn't even out. So there's some opportunity here still.
Did you have something to add to that?
Well, I guess I wanted to point out some things about this proposal. One is that they say that they're planning for the future, that Denver is growing, it's been growing fast for quite some time. But in fact, what's happening around the country and around the world is that use of automobiles is going down. Ever since 2005, actually, statistically, vehicle miles traveled in the country has been decreasing. It's been decreasing consistently, not just because of the recession, but it's been decreasing consistently. And there are several reasons for it. One is that the millennials, who now make up 25 to 30% of our population, live in a different world. They are taking advantage of the mass transit that we're spending a lot of money to build. They're moving back into the cities. They simply don't live the same way we did. They are not buying cars to the extent that we have. I have nieces and nephews who don't have licenses to drive. They simply don't need them. They go to urban universities, they live downtown, they live in areas that they can bicycle to. So there's a change coming around the world. Gas prices are tending to go up, although right now I don't think I've ever seen them be quite as low. But they will tend back up, of course. There are other reasons that traffic is coming down.
Boomers are retiring.
Boomers, I love to drive cars, always have. I love getting on highways, and I'm sure, the audience remembers the days when, like me, I got into a car and tried to go as fast as I could and get my car off the ground. This is a part of how we grew up as boomers, was with our automobiles. This group is not the same. They simply don't see value in it. And I'll point out another thing that's happening right immediately, and is that the whole intelligent car movement is starting to take over. Google has now put over 300,000 miles without an accident on a car. Cars are starting to be equipped with sensors that can sense what the other cars around them are doing. Now, I'm not suggesting that any time in the near future I'm going to turn my life over to GM because they can't even get an ignition switch right. But I think the reality is that these advances in technology are going to drastically change the way our highways work. They're already predicting quadrupling the efficiency of the roadway. So cars that can now have to be a certain length because I'm afraid to be any closer, these machines will allow them to be much closer.
Well, and especially when they're communicating with the cars in front of them.
That's what I mean.
I think there's one more point here that's really important, and that is that RTD has done some amazing things in Denver, and RTD is on track to deliver quite a few more amazing things. As an example, the East Corridor commuter rail line is scheduled to open in about just over 18 months, about a year and a half away. I did the tour 2 weeks ago and I'm amazingly impressed by what I saw. And that commuter rail line, which runs adjacent to only a few blocks away from this I-70 corridor, is expected to have 28,400 riders per day in this corridor. And those numbers have historically been very accurate. RTD continues to deliver these projects, and the ridership numbers continue to be greater than what's predicted. And in addition to that, we've got two more they're commuter rail lines that will be crossing this segment. So there will be two that are going through Globeville. One of them that is the partial connection to Boulder that goes to Broomfield, and yet another is the line that goes up to about 120th and Hawley. And so each of those will have a really significant impact on what's happening in this corridor.
Well, sorry.
Go ahead.
So if you replace the highway with a boulevard that you can walk on, and most people do walk
Bike.
and bicycle. A lot of people bicycle. In fact, I've heard that over 30% of the people living in these neighborhoods don't have cars. They don't drive. So they need to be able to walk. They need to be able to bicycle. What we're suggesting is a boulevard that pulls those transportation modes back in. It's a multimodal boulevard. It's able to handle mass transit. It's able to handle bus rapid transit and bicycles and walking, because this is how these people really want to get around. The highway is a detriment to all these things.
Well, I think you guys have given us a lot of very important things to think about in context of this proposal. Now, from my understanding, one of the most important dates coming up is October 31st. That's the end of the open comment period for the proposal. Is there any other dates that we should know about going forward, or where is your focus going to be following the comment period's closure?
So after the public comment period closes, this group of individuals, Unite North Metro Denver isn't a group per se, but this group of individuals will probably at least partially refocus to do a variety of things. The I-70 School of Theology, which is recognized nationally as an amazing theology school, has written a letter that is somewhat condemning of this project. And I think that there's going to be a lot of effort to generate awareness about that. We need to focus on talking to elected officials in rural parts of the rural parts of the state, to be talking about how their funding sources for their bridges is going to be used here.
Remember, this is a DEIS. It's a draft.
Right.
It has this public commentary period. They have to take all the comments that they see and go back to the drawing board or back to their documents and modify those documents. It's not just from public. They're getting comments from everywhere. The I-70 School of Theology, but also a variety of different sources are commenting on this. They then have to go back and redo it. So there's another round of this, and there's another public commentary period before they issue the final record of decision. Once they issue a record of decision, then they have to go get funding. So none of those things have happened yet.
When is the final decision supposed to be reached? I think I read early 2016. Is that accurate?
That could be accurate, but that's also assuming that there's no litigation.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of environmental groups right now that are saying absolutely there's grounds for litigation. The impact to the most affected communities is far too great, and they have expressed a real interest in saying, you know what, we're going to fight this because this is not acceptable. The impact is too great.
On
And this is
environmental,
unacceptable.
also for social reasons. Title VI, this is a disadvantaged neighborhood. It was when they dragged this through. It still is. What's happening is they're really having these poor working people bear the burden of this highway system. And really, for what benefit? For the benefit, apparently, of getting people through this area faster, not getting them out and investing into these neighborhoods, not involving them in what these neighborhoods really need, which is infrastructure improvement. They have 56 dead-end roads in there. 56. 46 was really their only way east and west. And now to disingenuously say that they're increasing the access in these neighborhoods is appalling.
They have some of the richest history in all of Denver. They have some of the most beautiful architecture. They have some of the most beautiful, amazing people living in these communities, many of whom have owned these houses for 3 generations.
Well, I think you guys have given us many interesting things to think about in context of this proposal, and I thank you both for being here. If people are interested in getting involved with your group, what's the best way to contact you?
We have a website, unitenorthmetrodenver.com, and somebody could send us an email at contact@unitenorthmetrodenver. We typically are meeting every other week, and our next meeting is on November 5th at 6 p.m. at the Valdez Perry Library, which is essentially at the corner of 47th and Vine.
The other website that we've got up is Reimagine I-70, and we haven't spent really, I don't think, enough time here talking about our boulevard. We've really drawn this. We've done a lot of work. A group of young planners called U3 Urban Planners have done an enormous amount of work to really draft this proposal up, and you can see it all on Imagine I-70.
That's great. Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you, Dean, for being here today. We really appreciate you taking the time with us and explaining to us more your proposal and what CDOT is proposing. And we want to thank you as well for joining us today for another edition of City in the Making. We look forward to you joining us next time when we discuss more city planning issues. And thank you again for being here today.